Hello, CSL. Welcome back. We are here today with an Easter special for the podcast. As always, myself, Coach Fury, here today on the channel, giving you updates from all things CSL. And today I'm joined back with Gary. Gary, welcome back. How's everything going?
Pretty good, man. Thanks for having me back.
Is it good to have a Washington team that's over 500 and looking like a playoff threat?
Yes, finally. It took me like 2.5 years, but yeah, finally.
Makes it a good Easter for you, certainly.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, so let's dive in. I mean, we've got up on the screen the obvious thing that we're gonna talk about to begin with is just a couple of trades. We're not going to cover every trade because there's a lot of sideways trades, weren't there, Gary? That um, don't really need talking about. I mean, it was a bit of activity, but nothing sort of note apart from a couple. I think. Would you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, this mostly minor deals. I mean, there's a couple of big ones, but mostly just teams trying to make some roster spaces and salary cuts. So
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to dive in with probably the of the bigger two. The first one, which was basically a trade that Houston sent Clay Thompson away for essentially some future assets, and OKC sort of getting Clay Thompson, moving away a few first round picks, and Orlando picking up Tyler Ennis. I mean, in terms of this deal, Gary, I mean, what do you think the impact is for Oklahoma to begin with, picking up someone like Clay Thompson for what was essentially a couple of first round picks and getting a first round pick back themselves?
I think that was a pretty good deal by Andrew, honestly. Because you look at Oklahoma City, they have Stanley Johnson, who's a volume inside scorer. And then they have some guys that are kind of inefficient on the outside, like the infamous Terry Rozier. And then you got guys like Justin Anderson, who just doesn't like to shoot as much, or Damari Carroll, who have actually good 3-point shooters, but they just don't shoot as much. But now they have Clay Thompson, a guy who can actually score efficiently from the perimeter. Arguably the best 3-point shooter in the league right now, in my opinion, because he shoots so much and hits him at around 44-45% rate. So I think that was a great deal for them. He's the perimeter threat that OKC needed, besides with Stanley Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with you. I think this was one of the smarter trades that Andrew and OKC have made in recent times. I think he's been one of those general managers since I've been in the league where he's made a lot of trades, and probably I'd say 30% of them I can understand the logic and where he's going, and there's probably about 70% where it's a bit like a trade for the sake of a trade, but certainly not for this one anyway. I think Clay Thompson's going to be a huge asset for them. You kind of touched on with Stanley Johnson inside and Clay giving that a bit of range, but I mean, what do you think the impact will be with Thompson alongside Rubio? Do you think that'll help Rubio's game as well?
It should, like I said, Rubio has always been known as a defensive specialist who can also some playmaking ability. The biggest problem with him is that he can't really shoot the ball. But now you add in the guy that has a high score rating like Clay Thompson and take away some shots, then that should help Rubio out as doing what he does best: pass the ball and play defense instead of chucking up shots. So I think that's a good move.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So let's have a look at. I mean, from the other side of this, really, in terms of the player, the main player moving, which is Thompson in this, the Houston Rockets. Can you understand the thought process behind Curious and moving Thompson on and finding him a new home?
I honestly think that I originally thought Thompson, somebody who shoots the ball this well and plays decent defense, would get better value than this. But on the other hand, Houston is trying to nuke the roster and get cap space for this offseason for a rebuild. So, I mean, I understand where Kyrus is coming from. He always has a plan. So, he also got a first rounder from Indy. I mean, Indy right now is surging to the eighth spot race in the Eastern Conference, but there's always a chance that injuries could happen and Indy may become a lottery team again. So I think the biggest point of this trade for Houston will be the Indiana first.
Yeah, I think a lot of this for me depends on how that pans out. I mean, we've touched on this podcast before with a couple of episodes ago, but I mean, if Indiana actually finally get it together and get the roster working with all that talent there, that pick could end up not being anywhere near the lottery. It could end up being a low first round pick, which when you look at it from that perspective, wonder whether he could have got something else for Thompson. But can understand the logic with that move because of the next trade we're going to probably talk about, and probably those two guys are not going to necessarily fit together very well. In terms
Yep.
of the trade from Orlando's perspective, do you think Ennis was worth giving up a first round pick?
I think I always felt that Ennis is underutilized because he actually has pretty good playmaking ability. And you look back when he got started minutes with Indiana and such, he was actually a pretty good 3 point shooter, around 38 to 40% from three. Great, assist to turnover ratio, and he's a decent defender. Nothing special, but he's decent. I think that in this league is always about. It's hard to find a starting point guard. I think Ennis is a low end starter, maybe a capable starter for a borderline playoff team. So for Orlando to give up a late first and some expiring, it's not a bad deal at all.
So do you see him starting in Orlando?
Yeah, I mean he should. Like I said, Rondo is too old and too inefficient, so I think Ennis should be starting.
And do you think that's going to necessarily help with their well essentially their playoff prospects this year, picking up
It
someone
helps a
like
little. I
Ennis?
mean, Ennis is not going to be a guy to carry your team, but looking from the talent coming in and out, they're getting an upgrade, so can't be mad about that.
No, I mean I think from my perspective, I think it's worth a gamble. I mean, we know Toronto's going to be one of the better East teams. After their trade for DeMarcus Cousins, they look like they've started to find a little bit of form now. So, I mean, to take a gamble on someone like Ennis is probably worth a go. I mean, the consensus around the league is Ennis is one of these players that polarizes opinion. I mean, you either love him or you hate him. And for me personally, I'm stuck right in the middle. I mean, I don't know where you sit with him. Do you think he's a bit undervalued then, or do you think he's someone who is potentially overvalued on that contract?
I think at around what do you make around 7.5 mil? I mean, it's a decent price for a low end starter. Like I said, I feel like Ennis can be a starter in this league, but you just can't expect this guy to come in and carry your team. But I think playing with guys like a healthy Joel Embiid and Andrew Wiggins, he could be a pretty solid floor general for them.
So maybe a move that Orlando have made with one eye on the future, then possibly as well.
Exactly.
Okay, so we'll move on to sort of the next trade now. So I mentioned that obviously this deal for Houston, just looking at it, didn't necessarily make much sense, but they then followed it up with probably the bigger blockbuster of the two, if we're honest, acquiring Dante Exum from the Utah Jazz for what was essentially their first round pick this year. Levine and Kristaps Porzingis. Can't say his name at all. I mean, huge moves, some big personnel and big players that have moved here. I mean, Kristaps didn't necessarily last very long in Houston, and Exum's been sort of the staple for the Jazz since I've been in the league. I mean, if we look at it first to begin with, from the Rockets' point of view, following on from that Thompson trade, do you think that this is going to be the first step to a huge restructure of that team, or do you think it's more again looking towards the off season?
I mean, I think the Rockets, pay a lot here. This is credit ransom for Dante Exum, but if you're looking at Exum, you think that he's probably like old player, but he's not. He's been in the league for a long time. He's only 25 years old, and he's locked into a really really good deal for a superstar. And I think that Exum is going to become that guy in Houston. He has already proven it recently with those 50 plus points outbursts at center. So Kyrus obviously knows how to utilize this guy, and I think Exum is the perfect building piece for Houston.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come back to talk about Exum and the positions that he's played already so far for the Rockets, because I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. But just focusing on the actual trade itself, I mean, the other pieces in the deal for the Rockets, obviously, in Buddy Hield, Evans, White, that OKC first. Do you think they're pieces that Houston are going to sort of keep hold of, or do you think they're aspects of the deal where they're going to look to try and flip them at the deadline?
I think that he's going to try to package some of his other expirings with that OKC first for another upgrade, in my opinion. That's what I've been seeing from his block, at least. That will make sense because, you know, you want to have a secondary star slash starter to play with Exum to build upon. And I think that with a package of how picks are so highly valued in this league, I'm sure in trade deadline everybody's gonna get an itch to start trading, and someone will probably be crazy enough to give them a legitimate second option for a package like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially how OKC are very up and down at the moment. Then borderline playoff, borderline lottery, and don't necessarily know where that pick's going to play out. So he could, depending on how OKC do with Thompson, who they've acquired, if they're not performing as well as we possibly think they might, then that pick could net him something else certainly. So moving on to the Jazz side of the deal, obviously dramatic change for them, moving their superstar, getting some assets back in Porzingis and that usefully that Houston first round pick. What do you think the Jazz are going down now? Are they going to go down a full rebuild, or do you think this is going to be a retool for them? I mean, what do you think the impact's going to be like for them?
I think that Kevin is going to start thinking about a rebuild. I mean, he tried to assemble one of the arguably top starting five in the league when he had DeAndre Jordan, Exum, Fareed, Parsons, and now Cotton. But for some reason, they just really can't get over the hump reaching the elites like Sacramento Kings, Phoenix Suns, Detroit Pistons, Dallas Mavericks. It just seems like they don't have enough depth to reach that level. I think Kevin realizes that as all his core pieces are getting older, guys like Fareed and Parsons are like 30, 31 years old, and they're fixing to get hit with that rating decline. So it's time to start looking after the future. And the biggest trading chip is Dante Exum, and he got quite a good package back, in my opinion. And now just this is only going to help him move guys like Fareed and Parsons away easier. I think it's going to be a rebuild in Utah.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you. I think Utah will go down the route of rebuild. I mean, they've that Houston pick. I mean, if Houston carry on the trajectory they are, even with Exum, then they could be looking at top five pick this year, acquiring another sort of good talent, borderline possibly superstar, all star type player to pair with Kristaps going forward. I mean, touching on Kristaps, I mean, do you think he's a player that is ever going to develop and become this, this franchise player that we all expected him to be when he was drafted initially? I mean, he's gone for a couple of teams now, or do you think we kind of need to settle that he's going to be a starter and possibly an all star, and that's probably his ceiling now?
I think that he just takes time. Like I said, coming to the league when he was like 18, 19 years old. Like he's still very young, still developing. And you look at his like efficiency overall, has been improving every year. I believe his true shooting percentage is like at 59% this year, which is pretty good. And I think it's going to take time for him to grow into a dominant big man. But I think that he still has the potential to become one of the best big men in the league. And I think he's a good franchise building piece as long as he's healthy. And Kevin will spend instructions on him to make sure that he's taking efficient shots.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one for me. I mean, if I was in Kevin's situation, I would actually be leaning not necessarily towards a full rebuild, I would just be leaning towards keeping the assets from this trade, plugging Porzingis in at the 4. You then got Fareed, Porzingis, Parsons. Yeah, you probably need to get someone in at 2. You got Cotton. You've obviously got the Houston draft pick, which we know there's some good talent in this draft, and hopefully it should be a high pick for the Jazz's point of view. That team could be, in really good shape next year. I know obviously some of them are aging, but in terms of the blend of youth and aging and the fact that they'll still have those assets and can still utilize them. I mean, that team for me could potentially still make noise in the West as a playoff team. Do you think it's the right thing for the Jazz to go to a full complete rebuild, or do you think there's a possibility that Kevin should rethink and just look at retooling with the assets he's acquired from this trade?
Personally, I think that they should go for a full rebuild. But like you said, they can definitely make the playoff this year. I mean, it's not like the talent is still there in the roster. Just they get a little bit more depth instead of just a one man army of Exum. But like I said, it's a tough call. It's always tough because each sim season here is like 6 to 7 months in real life, so it's always tough to see your team start losing and trying to rebuild. It's a tough process. It takes a lot of patience. So it's hard to tell from what I've seen from Kevin. He's not really a patient guy, so he might just do what you've been saying, just stick with the guys he got from this package and trying to compete for playoffs. But eventually, they'll just turn to another treadmill team because the other core guys like Fareed and those guys are all aging. And once the rating hits, the value decreases even more. And with those big contracts, it can be even more difficult to move. So I think he either stick with a full rebuild or get stuck at the terrible, terrible treadmill situation. So it's his call, but I think he should go for a full rebuild.
Yeah, and I mean, I think he's leaning towards a full rebuild. Um, Certainly from discussions that I've had with him and from his activity on the trade block, I think I'd be surprised if most of that roster's still around at the trade deadline. It looks like he's being quite active in trying to completely knock everything down for the Jazz. Just before we sort of move on to a couple other things in this podcast, just coming back to the Rockets and the discussion that we had. I mean, you mentioned obviously Exum has had a blistering start to his career as a Houston Rocket. Primarily, he's been played at centre for a few games and shown that he's done really, really well there in the DDS engine. I mean, do you think that some of the experimenting that Houston have done this season with trying to play a little bit more of the 3 ball and out and a little bit more small ball lineups, do you think that that's something that in terms of Exum, we're going to see a lot more of him play at the centre and the team built around him from that aspect? Or do you think this is just a temporary fix for Houston?
Honestly, I think he's just trying things out for now, but I think XM is going to stick back into a shooting guard role eventually once he get his other core pieces down. Because, like I said, I mean, yeah, XM looks good on paper for the small sample size as center, but he already got injured, and you have to wonder, like Miles and others have brought him to Chad, getting beat up inside as a little guy. Maybe he's one of those maybe it's a random injury, or maybe he's actually one of the causation for injuries because he's small and getting battered inside by big men. So it's something that he has to consider. But like I said, this season I think Karras is going to be experimenting like he's been doing all year, and we're probably going to see Exum play all 5 positions at some point, as long as he's healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to get your view on that really in terms of having a guy who can play all 5 positions because I mean, when I first joined Sim Leagues, one of the teams that you had, it was the famous all point guard lineup where from positions 1 to 5 you were playing a point guard for the handling ability, and I mean it kind of worked out okay for you, I think, if I remember rightly. I mean, you might be able to correct me, but I mean, in terms of Exum and the DDS engine, do you think there is the possibility that we will see him play all 5 positions or just move around lineups? And do you think there's more flexibility in that? for Houston, or do you think that, from your experience of playing similar type of lineups, that there are some, positives, obvious ones, but there are some real negatives that you might not necessarily see from the box score?
I think that Kyra is just practicing right now. Whenever in the future we match up against teams like Phoenix or Sacramento, where they seemingly have talent all over the place, and then you just gotta pick your poison. And if you have somebody like Exum who can play 1 to 5, then now instead of you can actually hide Exum from tough defenders like Okara White or MKG or Otto Porter and stuff like that, or Paul George and stuff like that. So I think Kyra's just testing where the best position is right now. So when he eventually make it back to playoffs, then he can know where to put Exum, where to hide him, so to speak, from a strategic point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can see him playing all five positions. The prospect of him playing at centre kind of worries me a little bit in terms of from a purist point of view. I mean, we know the DDS engine has some flaws in it, the version we use, and we tend to sort of have rules in place that limit some of those flaws, in particular the pace and the pressure. But my concern is that if Exum all of a sudden becomes this absolute god at centre and the injury was actually just a fluke injury, then this could completely revolutionise the league and could potentially ruin some of the purest facts, purest view that you tend to have traditional players at traditional positions, and
Yeah.
it might take something away.
Well, for sure, like I said, from a realistic perspective, that's not realistic at all. But at the same time, it's a sim league. I mean, it just depends on how you view it. Some people view it as more of a experiment slash fun game. Some people view it as purist, like you said. So I'm sure the commission should do something about it if somehow Exum becomes a glitch that just dominates the center. So, but I just don't think that Exum will sustain this success as center. I mean, just I'll hope not, but who knows?
Yeah, who knows? We'll see. We'll see. I mean, we'll see. Like you said, he's going to play multiple positions, so I'm sure we'll see every version of Exum this season,
Yep.
as he tries to eke out some wins for that Rockets roster. So we'll certainly see that. Um, so talked about a couple of trades, Gary. I mean, we'll move on now to something a little bit different. I mean, just having a look at the forum over the past few weeks and just trying to pick up things that have been discussed or things that have happened, and trying to shed some light on some different things and not just necessarily come on to this podcast and just talk about trades all the time. So one of the things that was mentioned was obviously the Raptors have made several huge trades over the past few weeks where they're retooled essentially to try and stay in the top elite bracket of the Eastern Conference. And one of the things that has been picked up is that on some of the recent games that they've had, there's been the emergence of Corey Joseph, who, I mean, for want of a better word, has kind of had a bit of a mediocre career so far to date. Do you think that's fair to say, Gary? He's not really done anything outstanding. Um,
Um. Corey Joseph's actually originally a guy that I was planning to draft, but then I traded a pick away for T.J. Warren. Well, go figure, right? That was looks like I messed up on that one. But yeah, Corey Joseph had a slow start because, like I said, the Raptors and Antoine has been having good point guards playing in front of him, like guys like George Hill and Jeremy Lin. So he's been being stuck in the shadows for a while, but I guess those guys are starting to age, and it's time for Corey Joseph to shine.
he has, and he certainly has come out and shined over the past few games. I mean, I'm just going to flick through a couple of the box scores here, but I mean, you can see, obviously, this game he had sort of some heavy minutes and didn't shoot too well, and started to show some signs of providing something other than just a bog standard backup point guard. And obviously, the next game, 23 points. Uh, Followed that with a 33-point game with just one turnover, and he seems to have carried it on. I mean, he's probably been playing from the bench and just supporting Jeremy Lin and Nick Johnson. But he really has sort of come alive. I mean, you've like you said, you almost drafted him. I mean, when you were thinking about drafting, did you think he would have this kind of impact eventually, or is it something that's just happened and it's just surprised everyone?
When I first initially scouted him, he looks like to be a really good defender, a good man-to-man defender. And the biggest problem with him was his shooting. It's going to take him a while to get his shooting preferences right, and even then, he's not really a huge threat from the outside. So that's why I passed on him because he's going to be a 2 to 3 years project fixing his preferences, and his lack of turnover causing ability was something that I didn't really want when I was building that team. But turns out he fits in perfectly in Toronto because they have other guys who can pressure the ball, and he doesn't have to be the lead man there. He just come off the bench and do his own thing, be all around good defender, and looks like his preferences got fixed now too, so he's pretty efficient as well now.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you can see that from his player card that he's gone from what was essentially a 40% career shooter to 47%, which is a really good increase. I mean, the 3-point game isn't there, and it never will be. But he doesn't take many shots there, so you can kind of live with that. Um, in terms of other aspects of his game, I mean, he's getting rebounds, he's providing more assists for the team. He's certainly looking really solid. I mean, obviously next year he's going to come into his last year of his rookie deal. But I mean, there's no reason if he keeps this up why teams who are looking for someone who can provide and be a good scoring defensive point guard. There's no reason why someone might not want to look at him next year.
For sure. He's got a good future for sure. Like I said, Chile Antoine did a really good job of molding him into the player that he was supposed to be. So it took a lot of patience, but it's paying off for sure.
Yeah, and it kind of shows how if guys do get the right types of instructions for some of these draft picks that where we see them, everyone screams and cries, "Oh my god, he's a terrible shooter because his preferences are all wrong." If you do get them and you do work with them and do use your instructions properly, then you can turn around a gem. Someone like a Corey Joseph.
Yep. Guys like Antoine and Dennis are very good at doing that. So they know how to use the 10 instructions well, and it pays off in the end. Now the value increases a lot. They can either keep him as part of core or trade him for more value later on.
Yeah, and the best thing is, you get 4 years with him. So, and if after 4 years he's restricted, so if he has turned it around so dramatically that he's a key part of your team, you can keep him for another 5 years. So,
Yeah,
win-win really. Just something I wanted to sort of draw on this podcast because it's been talked around on the forum, and delving into it, there's a really quite a large amount of work that went into it from Anton, like you said, the general manager of Toronto, to actually, work on his preferences and get him kind of fixed. So very well done there, I think.
exactly. I mean, he planned it out perfectly because, like I said, now that Jeremy Lin and George Hill are both aging, now they have a perfect, successor, a point guard, and Joseph.
Yeah, exactly. So let's end this podcast with something else as well. Not talking about trades, but I've mentioned to you, Gary, that we were going to think about talking about the All Star game and selections and all the things that tend to happen with that. But I think we're a little bit early for that. So one of the other things that we wanted to talk about was oh, you all right?
Yeah, I'm good.
Random sneeze, great. So one of the other things that people always talk about, and it's been discussed quite heavily on the forum over the past few months, is the MVP awards, because there's not really a clear cut MVP winner this year, I don't think. And I know we've been talking about it, and we both have different opinions, and I'm sure people who are listening to this will have different opinions as well. But I just wanted to sort of throw it over to you, Gary, and give you 5 minutes, a few minutes to pitch your MVP candidate. why you think he's MVP, and then I'll of course come back and argue with you and explain why my MVP candidate I've got is the right selection.
Okay.
So who you got, Gary?
Right now, I would have to say Paul George. Like I said, I actually had him as one of my top candidates of my first edition MVP rankings of last month. You're looking at Paul George stats. I mean, playing for Dallas now, which is one of the top teams in the league. He's averaging around, let's see, around 28 points a game, 5 assists, 8 rebounds per game, almost 2 steals a game, and a block a game, shooting 49% from the field and 44% from the three. I mean, those are some very, very efficient, impressive numbers. And I don't have the game with me, but I'm pretty sure his defensive stats are pretty stellar as well. So, and the Mavericks are 38-8 right now, and it's hard for me to not give him the vote that he deserves.
Okay, I can certainly see why you've looked at Paul George and decided that he is an MVP candidate. Do you think the obviously the trades that obviously moving to Dallas has had any impact on his status for what you consider him to be as an MVP?
Well, when he was in Orlando, they were still in the playoff hunt before they're blowing it all up, and he was carrying that team with DeMarcus Cousins. His numbers actually better there as well. Since he went to the Mavericks, his numbers dropped a bit because he seems like he played a little bit less minutes. But he's still putting up stellar numbers. Arguably the best wing in the league, in my opinion. So
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no denying that Paul George is. I mean, he's probably is the best player in the league now. I mean, people say Anthony Davis is probably up there with him. Kevin Durant's probably fallen off a little bit now. To be fair to him, the injuries have kind of caught up to him, but Paul George is probably up there as vying for that top spot. The reason I don't think that Paul George is the MVP candidate is for one very simple reason, and that is that he doesn't start games for Dallas. In my
yeah,
opinion, an MVP candidate has to start.
interesting. Okay. I
You
mean,
know,
that's
he
a good
has
point because he's been coming off the bench, kind of like James Harden did since he got to Dallas. So,
exactly. I mean,
yeah,
we know he's playing starter minutes, but to be the MVP, you have to be starting every game. In my opinion, you have to be the lead man, the guy who's going to go out there, and start, do the minutes, get everything, and that's to me that's the only thing he's missing.
for sure.
So for me, my MVP candidate at the moment, probably a slightly different, controversial one. I mean, he's been discussed a lot this year. For me, is Kevin Love. He's probably up there in terms of MVP candidate, most improved player for a whole range of reasons, but mainly because he's finally got his shot together. He's leading the Timberwolves to a above 0.500 record, which is amazing when you look at that roster in
Yeah,
terms of some of the players they have. And obviously, Roxy has done a fantastic job there in terms of making sure Love gets the ball. He's taken the right types of shots, and that stat line is really incredible. I mean, no one else has touched him in terms of points per game, rebounds per game. Yes, we know he's not going to get assists. He's not going to get blocks or steals. That's not his game. But he's shooting 49%, field goal percentage. He really is just leading that Wolves team to a playoff spot at the moment. And because he's basically taken that team on his back and he's doing, the scoring, the rebounding, doing everything for that team to get them wins. That is for me why he, at the moment, is the front runner for the MVP.
you can certainly make a case for Love for sure. Previous rankings I have as honorable mention because back then the Wolves were still below 500, but they've been playing a lot better lately with some of the new additions on the team. And yeah, I mean they're in the playoff race. They're over 500, and Kevin Love is dropping a ridiculous 32 and 12 stat line right now. He's averaging what around 14 free throws a game. He's hitting
Yeah.
about 12 of them, which is ridiculous. I mean, sure, he's not the greatest defender, but then he's gonna foul all your best players, so it kind of evens out. And just yeah, he's playing some incredible ball right now, and if he keeps this up, I can see why people will vote for him as MVP.
Yeah, no, I think he comes with the same sort of caveat that I mentioned with Paul George in terms of him with starter and not playing starters, not starting for the Mavericks. In terms of if the Timberwolves drop off and don't make the playoffs and don't become stay above 0.500 team, then I don't think you consider love for the MVP candidacy as well. I
For
think to
sure.
be an MVP, you have to be on a winning team and leading that team.
Yep. And another guy that I was actually looking at, I didn't really think about was Blake Griffin. He's actually having a really, really good season so far for the Cavs.
Yeah, I mean, I did. I'll be honest with you, I did look at Blake Griffin, and he is having a really good season,
The
and he's
crazy
doing a
thing
bit.
is not really playing that many minutes.
He's
He's
not,
averaging
no,
less than 30 minutes a game.
no, and he's putting up some really good numbers. So yeah, possibly him as well. I mean, for me, I still think it's love because of the fact that he's carrying the Timberwolves team on his back. Um,
For sure.
you know, Griffin does have help in Cleveland, obviously, but his shooting percentage and numbers are just ridiculous, aren't they?
For sure. What about your boy Al Horford? What do you think? You think it's his team or Marcus Smart's team?
Wow. I mean, he has an outside shot, certainly. I don't think he's probably got the stats to necessarily be MVP. I think it's a balance because there's a balance between him and Smart for our team. They both sort of take on an equal load. So I can't necessarily see him being an MVP candidate. I mean, even to be in the mention at 33 years old is a fantastic achievement, really,
For sure.
in DDS, certainly. So, um, yeah, I mean, possibly, but for me, it's love. I mean, for you, I think it's George, and I think we can probably come to a consensus that you know it may likely be Blake Griffin.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's really interesting to look at all the top teams right now that don't actually, most of them don't really have like a standout MVP candidate. It's more of a team concept to win games instead of a superstar driven carrying team that's leading the league right now. So you look at your team, Suns, the Kings, I mean, the Pistons. You guys don't have like a super number one option, but all five of your starters are averaging double figures and just playing good basketball. So I guess in this engine, superstars and everything.
no, I don't think so. I think it's probably also because of a lot of these elite teams. I mean, the Suns, the Kings, the Pistons. A lot of their stars, well, either A are injured in the Kings case, but they don't play many minutes.
Yeah,
So they have a deeper rotation throughout the regular season, which means we don't necessarily get to see, guys popping up with 36 plus minutes and putting up some of those ridiculous stat lines, um, which probably has a factor as well. Whereas if you look at the Timberwolves and Love, I mean, he's playing, 36 minutes. So probably why he's standing out more than some of the other guys.
yep.
Okay, so I think we'll leave it on there, Gary. I mean, should we just agree that rather than say Paul George and Kevin Love, we'll just go with Blake Griffin for now? We'll have a consensus that we can't agree on either, so we're just going to go with the one guy we did agree on.
I'm sure CAF GM would be very happy.
I'm sure he will be. Gary, it's been a pleasure as always. Thanks for joining us, and I hope to have you back on a future episode.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Like I said, always enjoy it. And thanks for having me on.